Welcome, my dear students of Class 9 to another class with me, your tutor, Atinyo Sikose. And our topic for today is from the poetry section, that is Mirror by Nini Lungalang. So first of all, we are going to find out a little bit about the poet here. Nini Lungalang, 1948 to 2019, is known to be one of the greatest Naga literary figure, and she is the founder member of Northeast Writers Forum, abbreviated as NEWF. She's a legendary English language teacher and very much known for her competency in the language. She's also an ardent musician, especially in the area of classical piano. She's known as a person, she's known to be very sharp and witty, and she has an aura of no nonsense and yet a very unassuming nature of humbleness. Now let's take a look at her literary work, which would also tell us more about what we are going to deal with in this poem here. Her literary work reflects the universality of our lives, and her book of poems or collection of poems, that is The Morning Years, you would find a whole lot of poems that has to do or deal with the everyday life. And most of her poems are anthologized. So what we have here is also an anthologized poem here. Some of her celebrated poems are such as Bad Season, Dust, and Pain, etc. Her poetry, like I said, deals with everyday lives, but do not get misled into thinking that it has to do with the mundane, everyday life activities. It has a deep connotation of subtle political and social elements in her poems, which are very powerful. She writes in free verse, and free verse is when you write a poem or when you write without using any rhyming scheme or rhythm. So there is no rhyming scheme or rhythm. From the previous lesson from Lord Allen's Daughter, you have also learned about the rhyming scheme. However, in this poem, you would not find any such thing here. The poem uses mirror, the title itself, Mirror, as a metaphor. And what kind of a metaphor? A metaphor of reflection, reflecting back. What does a mirror do? It reflects back the object that is in front of it. So let's find out this poem here. Mirror. They say, I look a lot like my mother. I do not think this pleases her. It cannot please her. I do not blame her. But we've learned, she and I, to live in our own mirror. How very interesting. Now, they here is referring to those people who know the mother and the daughter, so it can be relatives, friends, and I here is referring to the poet or the child, we can also say here. And so here, when the child gets comments such as, you look so much like your mother, you are so identical to your mother. When she heard such kind of, or when she hears such kind of comments, she always concludes that I do not think this pleases her. She always thinks that it cannot be a happy thing for her mother. Why? Because it cannot please her. I do not blame her. The poet pointed out that she's very certain. She has this conviction that the mother would never be happy to hear it. Why? Because we get to also see the disagreement between the mother and the daughter here. Maybe the child feels that she's nothing like her mother. So that's why she's saying that. But we've learned, she and I, to live in our own mirror. So here we may also take a look at this stanza wherein here is a child who is trying to reflect on the relationship of her of a daughter and a mother here, or relationship with her mother. So here, after much reflection, she has also come to accept the fact that both the mother and the daughter, or she, have a lot of differences. But we have learned, she and I, to live in our own mirror, which means that with wisdom, she has also come to understand that yes, we have different kinds of similarities, but at the same time, different kinds of differences, or different kinds of likes and dislikes in terms of opinions and beliefs, in terms of personality. But we have learned to live in our own mirror. In other words, we have learned to accept these differences or the similarities. So that is the beautiful part about these two lines here. I know why I look a lot like my mother. She's put much of her into my making, after my birth as well as before, more after my birth, because before my birth I was just a nebulous wish in her. And the poet in the second stanza goes on and say that I think I know, or in fact I know why I look, or why people say that I look like my mother. It is because she has put, or she has invested so much of her time, so much of herself into the upbringing of the daughter or the child here. And she pointed out the influence of the mother is more so when she was born, after she was born, in fact. But before, why not so before her birth? More after my birth, because before my birth, I was just a nebulous wish. Because before the daughter was born, it was just a hazy thing. It was just a notion, an idea that is there in the mind of the mother, which is not real, in fact. Then a tangible hope, then a palpable joy. Then she'd stroke me gently through her flesh, and she'd see me in her daydreams. She'd see me the way she wanted to see me. So here we get to understand, we get to pick up a tone of hopelessness here. We find that the child said that the influence or the impact of the mother is more so after she was born and less when she before her birth. Why? Because before her birth she was just an idea in the mind, but it slowly turns into a tangible hope, something that is real. And then when she was brought to this earth, it became a real joy. Or when the news that the mother is going to have a baby, it turned into a real joy. Then she'd stroke me gently. So before her birth, the mother would be very happy. The mother is very happy that she is expecting a child, and she's stroking her stomach and comforting the child in that way. But the mother would daydream in the sense that the mother is having an idea of a child before that actual child was born. So that's why we can see here the idea of the mother, that is an ideal child, or we can also say perfect child. So the mother might be in her daydreams, might be thinking, oh, when this child is born, I am going to shower lots of love. I'm going to love this child like anything. And she would also love me back. She would never say no to me. She would go to such kind of schools. She would become this and that. Such kind of dreaming was being done before her birth. And that's why the poet is saying that she'd see me the way she wanted to see me. She is conjuring up, imagining pictures in her mind that suggests that it is not real, this ideal perfect child is not real, that the child would do exactly and say exactly what the mother would or is dreaming of. Sometimes I'll see the phantom child, and it would anger me to unreasoning hatred. I'd see it in the things she'd say. Why aren't you? Why can't you? Why do you always? Why do you never? And I would weep in wild frustration, weep hot and helpless, hopeless tears. Hopeless because I'd recognize even then my invulnerable rival, my little enemy, what I had never been and could not hope to be and did not want to be. So that's what the poet feels. The poet said that sometimes this ideal perfect child is seen in the things that the mothers say. And here she referred to it as a phantom child. Why phantom? Because it is not real. It is just a fictitious idea or fictitious character or a fictitious daughter in the mind of the mother. And when she finds that she is being compared to this ideal perfect child in the kind of things that she say, why can't you put things properly, why do you dress up in that way, or why do you say such kind of things, you know, in the kind of things that so in the kinds of questions that the mother say, we find that the mother is not happy with the child here. Why? Because she already has a perfect child, an idea of a perfect child in her mind. So when the child failed, or when the child is not able to perform up to the expectation of the mother would go and complain in such manner. And that would make the poet feel so helpless. And she would weep, cried, fresh tears, hot, fresh tears. Because why? Because she felt hopeless. And why hopeless? Because she's competing against something that is not real, something that is perfect. And as human, we are never perfect. And that is why she said that it is a hopeless situation. And she calls this phantom child, the poet calls this phantom child as invulnerable rival. Why invulnerable? Because think about it, if you have an idea in your mind, it's perfect, the way you want to color it. Supposing, take the example of your favorite food right now. If it is presented to you on the table, you can imagine the aroma. You can also imagine the color of the food exactly the way you want it. But if you go and prepare it yourself, in reality, it may not be as good as it looks. And if you compare it to what you have in your mind, it may not be the same thing. So likewise, the mother also has this perfect child in her mind. And in the mind of the perfect child, or in the mind of the mother, the phantom child or the little enemy would never go against the wishes of the mother, because it is not real. A real person may retaliate, a real person may rebel, a real person may not always agree with you. A real person has his or her own beliefs, his or her own views and opinions. So that's when the conflict arises here. So that's why the child here finds herself in a very hopeless situation. But interestingly, you would find that in the second line, the fourth stanza, and it would anger me to unreasoning hatred. Take note of the word unreasoning. Perhaps the child is able to reflect back on this kind of situations and learned that it was very unreasonable to hate her mother. Why? Because, there is also a saying that when you are very young, you find your parents to be a hero. And then when you grow up a little bit, with different kinds of experiences, you would start to think that your parents do not know anything, and then later on with your more experiences and wisdom added to your life, you would begin to understand and appreciate your parents. So that is the kind of different phases that we go through. So perhaps even this child is able to realize that her hatred towards the mother is unreasonable. And this perfect child, this ideal child that the mother has in her mind, is something that the real child can never be. She does not want to be a perfect child. She does not wish to be a perfect child, and she could not even hope to be excellent, to be perfect. She does not want to be that kind of a perfect child. In other words, she wants to figure out things by herself. She is curious enough to learn things by herself. She wants to explore things by herself, or express herself, her own individuality, we can also say here. Fifth stanza, so you see, I look a lot like my mother. She stamped herself so deep in me with things that are of hers and things that are of hers, and did not want to be. Yes, I look a lot like my mother, and my daughter looks a lot like me. You would find that the fifth stanza has a whole change of tone here, and the element of irony is quite visible too. Now, what is the irony that we find here? We would also be discussing that. So the poet here says that, so you see, Why is it that I am so much like my mother? Why is it that people say that I look a lot like my mother? Because she has, in her upbringing, she has put a lot of herself into my making, that is, the poet's making. Why? Because the mother would go and say things or try to guide and advise the way she thought is good for her daughter. And likewise, she has also cultivated a lot of personality traits or character traits from her mother, and that is the influence of a mother over a daughter. So that is something that is inevitable. We would also be discussing that in detail now. So that's why she said that in a very humorous way. She stamped herself so deep in me. There are some things that I am very much identical, certain qualities that I am very much identical to the mother. Soul deep, I am inseparable to my mother. But how is that achieved? With things that are of hers. It has to do more with the mother's views and opinions, beliefs. And yet, and did not want to be. The child also pointed out, or the poet also pointed out, that these are some of the influences that she does not want. Like I said, she wanted to establish her own personality. She wanted to figure out her own life instead of living the life of a perfect life that is imagined and pictured in the minds of the mother. That is pictured in the mind of the mother. And here is the irony. Yes, I look a lot like my mother, and my daughter looks a lot like me, which is very ironic. And irony here is the use of sarcasm as well as humor, and the element of truth is very much visible here. The inevitability of the influence of the older generation to the younger generation, or of a mother to her daughter, because the way we are being brought up, the way a person is being brought up depends a lot, or the character qualities, character traits, personalities depends a lot on the environment as well, and the kind of values and principles that are being upheld in the family. So that's why she says that maybe in certain behavioral traits, she looked like her mother. And what happened when she was young, she wanted to establish her own personality, and yet when she turned into her motherhood, into the face of motherhood, she also finds that my daughter, or her daughter, looks a lot like her. So that is why we say that this kind of process, this kind of influence is inevitable, and it is ironic as well. So to summarize the poem here, the poem is about a beautiful relationship between a daughter and a mother. Why beautiful? Because like I said, the daughter has also come, in fact, both of them have also come to a mutual understanding or agreement that yes, in certain cases they may be similar, but in so many ways they are two different persons with different personalities, with different kinds of likes and dislikes, with different kinds of beliefs, opinions, etc. So that's why you would find that we have learned to live in our own mirror. We have come to accept each other's differences and similarities. We have learned to live our life the way we wanted to. We also find here the cycle of matriarchy, the social interaction of a woman or a female to a female. We can also find here the matrophobia, that is fear of the mother, or failing short to live up to the expectation of a mother here. So the child felt in that way. Conflict caused in the relationship due to generation gap differences. We also see here a lot of conflict, a lot of sadness, hopelessness was created in the relationship. Why? Because there was that generation gap. And what do we mean by generation gap? If you think about it, I'm sure you have come across comments such as your parents saying that in our time, we never do such kind of things. Why do you behave in that way? Why are you acting in that way? Why are you using your gadgets so much? In our time, we go out and play and so on. See, so those are the different kinds of values and opinions that have changed over time with generation and with the social evolvement that we can see. So here, this kind of generation gap is also seen here. The mother and the daughter are not able to relate with each other. However, like I said, it's a beautiful poem because we learned that they have come to reconcile with each other. But we've learned, she and I, to live in our own mirror. And I've also pointed out the phrase that is unreasoning hatred. With time, over time, the daughter was also able to understand herself and understand the relationship better. And she began to realize that her hatred towards her mother was unreasonable, because with womanhood, or with the phase of motherhood, she has also experienced the fact that even her daughter looks a lot like her, and so this kind of influence of a mother is inevitable. So it is also about, we can say, to put it very precisely, it is about a beautiful relationship of a mother and a daughter. It is about accepting the differences and recognition of individual personality. It also helps us to understand and appreciate the differences and similarities that we have with our own families, with our own parents, and so on. And it also gives us glimpses into our own relationship. Why? Because you would find that these kind of conflicts are inevitable. At the same time, it could be the reason of a generation gap, but it could also be found that these kind of things are inevitable, and that one must be able to one must be able to come to terms with one another, accepting the differences and similarities. Who knows? You might be, who knows? You might be mirroring your parents and eventually mirror your character to your children or the next generation eventually. So that is what we have here, and it's a beautiful poem. And with that, we would wrap up this class. Thank you all very much for joining me.